Hello, welcome to a little series I hope to do on looking back at investigations we've done in the past and maybe elaborating on things at a bit of a slower pace. We went back to Bingley Cemetery basically for somewhere to go. It was the second investigation of the year after COVID, or at least when COVID had died down enough for us to go back to work. This cemetery was the place where I myself had seen my first proper, full-on unexplained phenomena and watched it glide across the cemetery. So I was returning to the scene of the crime, as it were. Now in my head I had a very clear picture of what I thought had occurred. So as I'm walking around on my own, I retrace my steps in my mind's eye, and then I can't find the place. It just doesn't line up. The things I had in my peripheral in my mind's eye weren't there. So I was a bit confused and thought, well, this is interesting. I've come right to the place where I thought I'd seen this experience, but there wasn't an openness to where I could see the image trail along like I had done. So instantly I was on a bit of a back foot and had to wait for the rest of the team to tell me where I'd had the experience. And that was a little bit of a problem for me. The way that we remember things isn't necessarily the way that they occurred. So trying to prove spirits and what you've seen is just so difficult if you can't remember it correctly. This investigation was the first time we'd had Ben joining us with his cameras and sound gear. As a film student, I was really excited what he could bring to the table. And secondly, this was, I think, my sister's return to the team properly. She'd dabbled over the years, but then university got in the way, and however now, as a more settled woman, she could come along. And so it was quite exciting to be investigating with her again. Another first time was me cracking out the apps. You know, Sonos app, Echovox, and GhostTube. I had issues with the apps before we'd even started, but I'm always open to try them before knowing for sure. I just don't understand how spirits know what frequency to activate to get which word out of the dictionary. It's not like it comes with a manual. So we set about having a walk around and checking out places to maybe do lone vigils or just to try a board or, getting a run of the place in daylight for safety's sake, really. The place is vast. It's almost like 3 cemeteries in one, and I'm quite keen to stay away from the graveyard part aspect of it, so I'm looking for open field parts, distancing from the graves themselves. We don't want to be worrying people that we're up to no good, and dog walkers are very common. One of the first things we got was Peter Sutcliffe, who is the Yorkshire Ripper, famous or infamous in our area for having been a serial killer. He comes up pretty much every time, and that's not why we're there, so we kind of skip around that. We open up these apps to give them a go and run some word bank stuff, and I think it seemed to be intelligently responding, strangely. I think one of the first words we got was Walter. I presumed that was a first name. And on getting Walter, we all introduced ourselves name by name. I then said, hey, lead us somewhere. You've got word bank, I have a K2 which lights up in my hand. Tell us where we want to go, help us out. And then the next word that came through was guide. And I was like, yeah, guide us. Now, graveyards themselves aren't really places of the dead. They're places of the mush and the bones, but there's not like spirits don't hang out in graveyards, but they do come to the board, so wherever you open a board, you should get activity, hopefully. So, in and of themselves, cemeteries are peaceful, and you're not disturbing the dead, you're not talking to the bodies, you're talking to anyone who wants to talk back. And you can't force that. In fact, the number that came through was 9 spirits on the board. It didn't take long for Ben to say that he heard breathing over his shoulder, and then Sam was spelt out on the board. Sam is a spirit still following us round, and he was somebody we tried to banish and cross over in York, and it was actually Bingley Cemetery that we ran to next to try and ask any other spirit for advice on how to tackle him, and he was the first spirit to come through, as if to say, well, no you don't. So when he comes through in Bingley Cemetery, that actually does bring back quite a few memories. And here he was again tonight, being the nuisance he can be. And yet at the same time, he's such good value for money, it's hard not to get excited when he comes back. With Sam in the background, we ended up talking to Nina, an 8-year-old girl, who seemed to take a liking to Ben, saying that she was hugging him and close to him, and Ben was starting to feel overcome by emotion, which is obviously potentially a sign of a spiritual connection. So Ben had this Nina hugging one leg and also mentioning Sam was in the background. And Sam must have seemed like quite a frightening man to her. Back then, it had been quite a break with COVID and everything since we'd spoken to Sam or about Sam. And when he came through, I'd asked him to give us a sign that it was him, and he spelled Ursula. Now, I included didn't remember that name beforehand. As soon as he spelled it, I was like, oh, right, yes. The penny dropped. So I knew it was him, and just because of the activity, you just feel such an increase in a weirdness, maybe a chill, just the board picks up speed. There's not really any other way to describe it than things pick up around him. But I was quite convinced, yes, he was with us at this time. And it had been around the time that Sam had shown himself that I saw my first apparition a couple of years earlier, and had an overwhelming urge to leave before we'd pretty much got going. It kept coming and going in waves the previous time. If I'd have been on my own, I definitely would have gone, but I had no reason to know why. I couldn't tell you why I wanted to leave. I just had a feeling not to do it the time before. And I think Jill picked up on that as well this time around, because even Jill actually told us she had to go home when Sam had come and was around. And it turns out that she just made that up. She just wanted out, and she's since claimed she will never go back to Bingley Cemetery. Just the vibe of the place when Sam's there is off-putting. But on to other things. We were trying to get information off the board and the apps, and so we'd had a Walter for sure, who was a doctor, and then we had the board rush over to Jay as the word Jennifer came through the phone. That was just one of those brief instances where it's hard not to say, hey, that was great. And coincidences are things that happen, but sometimes there's so many coincidences you start to think that also seems like a stupid explanation. Now the next thing I remember happening was Ruth coming through. Ruth is our protector, the very anti-Sam if you like, and they started tussling. When you asked the question of the board, it seemed like they were both trying to answer, and the glass was going yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You know, Sam's trying to interrupt it, Ruth's trying to answer us properly. It's just became very exhausting for Ruth, I think, in the following investigations, when Sam was almost plaguing her as well. Ruth stepped in to protect Nina. That was also a thing. She's very protective and loving, and it's just so soft and seems like a nice woman, whereas Sam is just belligerent and irritating. And yet I do respect him. So after Jill makes her fake escape, I walked around with Becky, my sister, and Ben and Lucy walked around, just on his own, just in pairs, and Becky was feeling very calm and confident, and then I heard nothing, other than a rustle in the trees. I did hear that. Now Becky claimed she'd heard a roar like a tiger, and when Ben reviewed the evidence, what was actually caught was a weird noise that was neither tiger nor bush, like an interference at that exact moment. That for me, there's a big question mark over it, but I just think it's the most bizarre thing. What?
Growl, full on growl. You must have heard that, Chris.
What? What? I heard a bird in a tree.
No.
I have no conclusion what went on, but Becky heard one thing and the audio did something weird. We regrouped, went back to the board, and the next spirit we got was Lola Stephen. Very rare that we actually get last names, so that was an interesting thing. And Lola seemed to hang about, and I was hearing movement coming up from behind. I was constantly turning around like, is somebody there? And that was unsettling everybody else. The board led us to say that Sam's sister was with us, and she told us to run. At first, I thought Sam and this sister were going to be overpower us. Things were going to go bad. So I was very much ready to leave anyway. But it seemed like the narrative was that Patty, Sam's sister, was warning us against him. Now, I do think I had said at this point, Sam, you go on and scratch me, do something bad, which was probably a bad idea. But then the sister had stepped in to say, don't, be careful what you ask for. And I was like, right. So I retracted the permission to scratch me. And Patty seemed to step back. I think we didn't hear much else from her, but if I could only find out a last name of Sam, then we've maybe got the sister to follow back on as well. Lola seemed to take front and centre.
Lola? Lola. That's a nice name. How old are you, Lola?
Lola Stephen.
Stephen. Lola Stephen, is that your name?
At the very end of the investigation, she spelt out behind Ben grave. Now, as I say, we were quite a distance away from the graves. We were just on a big wide path. So we flashed our torches around, and we all in the low light was like, Lola, there's Lola. Lola Stephen, is it? And we were like, yeah, it's Lola Stephen. When we actually checked properly, letter for letter, it was Lola Stepien. But, I mean, it's so close. How do I explain the wrong spelling? I don't know. But it was miraculous. I swear none of us had seen that, or it was dark. And that was so close. I mean, I think it was like one letter out. And as I say, so rare that we get a last name. That seemed like the greatest evidence. But I know the app is untrustworthy in and of itself, but can the spirits take that word bank, even that dodgy app, and use it for good, in a good way? I don't believe that spirits are going into the equipment knowing what string to pull to make it say what by adjusting EMF frequencies. I find that difficult to believe. But then again, who's to say? All I know is it did actually give good word evidence on that night. The best we've ever had, in fact. Although we do roll out these word apps in the future from time to time, I would say they're just more confusing than anything. They spit out word after word just for the sake of it. I mean, I might as well be reading randomly from a dictionary. I'm going to get one relevant hit that seems to fit the conversation. So yeah, Bingley is probably the best graveyard we go to. You just get this feeling of you shouldn't be there. I don't know whether there's a strength to the place or whether we get amped up, but people are now worried about going there. And this was a place we just threw in because we had nowhere to go. We don't really want to be outside at all. We want to be nice and warm and have a toilet, whether it's summer or winter. But finding somewhere to go, it's like, well, we could do there. But now Bingley's becoming a place of its own, really. Now, there are some other really good pubs in Bingley that we've done that have rich histories and dark histories. But, as I say, it's not like people want us in there. We're not a massive team at all, one of the smallest teams, the lesser known teams. We're happy with the way we do things, and we don't rile them up, and we're quite happy to carry on regardless of whether we are known well. I think with it being Ben's first time as well, I think he really identified with Nina and had a great experience for his first time, and he did a great job editing the video, and I was just really happy with it. I would like more cameras, more camera people, but people just don't seem to want to do it. Now I would love to hold the camera, and because I know what I'm doing, but I need to be elsewhere, you know. I can't do it. I would do everything. I would be a one-man band if I could, but I can't. This comes from what I've learned. I'm quite controlling, I suppose. I like everything to be done my way. That's the whole reason I started this team, was I want this doing my way, which is the right way to me. One final word about Ruth. We need to go back to her cemetery where we met her and see if we can get a stronger connection, because she was one of the strongest people, communication-wise, we'd ever met at the time. I remember I had a K2 in each hand, and I'd say, lead us to your grave, and one would flash and the other didn't. And so I'd take that direction, get to a junction, say which one it'd flash, the other one would flash. So she was just leading me, and that was fantastic. The interaction that actually gets results, I want to get that again. But like I say, COVID brought down the whole thing. We need to revisit these places, reconnect with the spirit. But yes, Ruth was almost like a childcare person for Sam, in that she clung on to him and he was clinging on to us. So they were never too far apart. I'm not sure of the situation now, because Sam reckoned he'd escaped her, but it's so hard to say. This could all be completely made up, or we could all be crazy and inventing it in our brains. I have no evidence on these sort of things other than what it seemed to be. And I do always try and take a very straightforward, on the line, neither side of the fence way of looking at things. But also, I follow the narrative of what believers would say. And if you've watched any of our other investigations in a row, you will see that the storyline kind of does make sense, and we don't make it up. So ultimately, yes, we will return to Bingley. Maybe not all of us, but some of us. I would love to see the weird thing I saw again. Especially if it was Ruth or Sam. I don't know. I just thought it was white, like a misty veil, reared up like a horse, and travelling fast. And I also remember the feeling of dread before I saw it, for some reason. And it's just a great place. Well, I don't know what else to really let you in on there, on this particular one, so if you want more like this, please let me know, and I'll revisit a few other investigations and see what I remember. Hey, thanks for watching. Bye.
Cross.
Lola Stephen!
Fuck off. No, wait, can you just shine this in there?
Missing medicine. Chris, are you hearing this?
Yeah.
Did you hear what that just said?
What did it say?
Missing medicine.
I don't understand.